All right, welcome back, you guys. Welcome to Freedom Papers. This time, I'm all alone. My dear friend Connor Clegg, who I usually drag into the studio whenever he is nearby, he can't make it because he's with Charlie. They're going to church, and Charlie's doing some speech nearby in Arizona. But we are continuing the topic from last episode that we did with Connor. So last episode, we did 15, Federalist Paper 15. It's called The Insufficiency of the Present Confederation to Preserve the Union. It's by Hamilton, of course, pen name Publius. And today we're doing paper 16. Shocker there, right? So 16, like many of the other papers that are a continuation, this one is called the same subject, Continued, by Hamilton. So we're going deeper into the problems of the Articles of Confederation. This one, what I took out of it and what a lot of the other people that have done an analyzation of this paper, they say that it's making the case for a stronger union and why we're stronger together, why the Articles of Confederation are bad because we aren't united, and then why we need to unite specifically with the U.S. Constitution. Why are the anti-federalists so against the idea of forming a union if that's one of the main problems with the Articles of Confederation? What the heck is going on there? So that being said, I have a whole list of things that I want to go through with you guys. But one of the main topics of this paper, we'll get to it, but it makes the case that one of the big problems is that the Articles of Confederation really just joins the states together into a league. And it's an article, a document that cares about states and their role in the league. But the U.S. Constitution is more so about the people and their government. So I saw this displayed in the preambles of the Articles of Confederation versus the U.S. Constitution's preamble. And I wanted to read that as a way to get started so you guys can see why we're dealing with such different forms of government, such different documents. Let's start with the preamble to the Articles of Confederation, the one that really just has to do with forming states into a league. It says, quote, "To all whom these presents shall come, we, the undersigned delegates of the states, affixed to our names, send greeting. Whereas the delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled did on the 15th day of November in the year of our Lord 1777, and in the second year of the independence of America, agree to certain Articles of Confederation and perpetual union between the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, and Providence Plantations, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, in the words of the following." And then it goes on. Now that, like I said, really just has to do with the states. Now let's see how much of a difference that is to the U.S. Constitution, because, wow, I mean, the preamble to the Constitution is a really big deal. I mean, it's one of the most famous paragraphs you can think of. It says, quote, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." I mean, oof, how special is that? So that being said, I think that gives a really good idea of like, all right, we're dealing with two really different styles of government documents here. And if you ask me, I like the U.S. Constitution's preamble a little bit more than the Articles of Confederation. And by that, I mean a lot more. I don't know why I said a little bit. Now, let's get on into the topics. Let's start, I usually do this. I like the first sentences of all these papers. Usually the most, popular sentence can be the last one. But for me, I like the beginnings of each because it really sets the stage. Let's begin now. Publius, or Hamilton, says, "The tendency of the principle of legislation for states or communities in their political capacities, as it has been exemplified by the experiment we have made of it, is equally attested by the events which have befallen all other governments of the confederate kind of which we have any account in exact proportion to its prevalence in those systems." What is he saying there? That's a fancy sentence. What is he saying there? History shows confederacies fail. Not only are we a good example at this point of confederacies failing, is the Articles of Confederation a good example, but all of history with confederacies our size or larger, smaller, they all have not succeeded. And not only that, but Publius goes on in that paragraph to explain that that's what the great political writers that they have been looking to for advice have also been saying. The great political writers before them and of their time were saying confederacies do not work, and they leaned towards the idea and the concept of a federalist system with a federal government at the top, bringing all of them together, and then combining those state powers and unifying them to work in cooperation and coordination. So that's a great way to kick it off. But the problem is that not only do they fail, you guys, Publius then goes on to say, this exceptionable principle may as truly as emphatically be styled the parent of anarchy. He's saying confederacies, and specifically the Articles of Confederation, is a parent of anarchy, the cause, the creator of anarchy. It has been seen that delinquencies in the members of the Union, when you're considering the Confederacy, are its natural and necessary offspring. What does that mean? It means it's just natural for the states within a confederacy to become delinquent, to have problems, to become problem children of the parents of anarchy that is a confederacy. He says, and that whenever they happen, the only constitutional remedy to these delinquent states is force. And the immediate effect of the use of it is civil war. So the natural progression they're discussing here is that there will be bad behavior in these states when you have a confederacy, and we'll get into why later. But once you have that bad behavior, the only way, given the government that is structured in the Articles of Confederation, because it really just says all the states are going to act on their own as sovereign states, but they're going to be combined into this league of little states, the only thing really bringing them together is that agreement. And you can't exactly tell one state what to do or what not to do. You can say, well, we're all part of the same country, so you've got to shape up, okay? You've got to do certain things and follow certain rules. There's nothing really holding them to that, okay? And so you're going to have some delinquent or bad behavior in the states, whether that's individuals in those states acting badly, or it's states saying, I'm going to defy the concept and the people at the top in this confederacy. When that happens, literally the only way that the Articles of Confederation say you can fix this is to go to war or use military force and power to stop the state from doing the bad behavior. And that's kind of messy, okay? That's not ideal. And so what happens when the only thing you can do to stop bad people from behaving in a bad way is using force against them? Well, they're probably going to fight back. And that's what we're going to really talk about today. What happens when they fight back? Well, civil war occurs between the states. And then the result of that war is a disunited and abandoned confederacy. Once you get into that civil war and the confederacy starts to shrink and dissolve, the only thing that is natural after that is for whatever larger state, more powerful state in that quarrel, whichever one's more powerful and larger and has more resources, they're going to win. That's just the bottom line. It's human nature. It's the nature of war. When you don't have some overarching force like a federal government to step in and say, we're going to stop this state versus state quarrel, whatever state's bigger and more powerful is going to win. What Hamilton and Publius, what they're saying in this paper is that sometimes the more powerful state is not going to be the good guy. And that's how things just go downhill. Now, we saw a lot of this in the talks, especially in papers 2 through 5. Remember when we were talking about what happened back in England, what happened back in Europe, what happened back in Rome and Greece, and all of the other examples of these small nation states fighting each other that were bordering countries. They just fight each other, they waste resources, and they cause massive suffering to the people. And whoever's more powerful and has more military resources, more blockades, all of that basic stuff, they're just going to end up winning. And it's just this massive conquer and then retreat, conquer, retreat over these small borders. That's what America would turn into. And of course, it wouldn't be America anymore. It'd be a bunch of small little countries. So that's what they're saying is going to happen. You're going to have to use force if all we have is the option to use force against bad actors. You're going to have force that will lead to fighting, lead to civil war, and then lead to potentially bad actors that are more powerful than the good actors in the states rising up and taking over. And that's not good at all, right? Let's move on to the next part. So say we have these bad actors, and we have no way to stop them other than having them go to war with each other. Publius says, quote, "It would rarely happen that the delinquency to be redressed would be confined to a single member. And if there were more than one who had neglected their duty, similarity of situation would induce them to unite for common defense. Independent of this motive of sympathy, if a large and influential state should happen to be the aggressing member, it would commonly have weight enough with its neighbors to win over some of them as associates to its cause. Specious arguments of danger to the general liberty could easily be contrived. Plausible excuses for the deficiencies of the party could without difficulty be invented to alarm the apprehensions, inflame the passions, and conciliate the goodwill, even of those states which were not chargeable with any violation or omission of duty." Now, what is he saying there? Here's the deal. It's probably not going to be a situation of just one bad state. Maybe it could be, nothing's stopping it. But when you have one bad state, you're probably going to have multiple states that you're now going to have to deal with. Why is that, though? Publius says that, one, there could just be multiple states that are bad actors. They could just have the same bad intentions. They could just both want to defy the Confederacy. They could refuse to be a part of the team, a part of the league, and that's the main problem. But the next step is that, hey, maybe they're just persuaded by the sheer power of this growing mass that is these new states. Maybe the in the middle and in between states that don't exactly know what they're doing, or just kind of want to be left on the sidelines, are like, it's probably a little bit safer for me to just join into this new and growing party of these new delinquent states, because maybe they're not so bad after all. And even if it is a little bit bad, hey, maybe we've got to sign on with the devil to protect ourselves and to get that sense of security and safety. I mean, how many times throughout history have people done that? A lot. The third example they gave, though, was just the idea that when you're bad, I mean, you're going to lie to people. And a lot of the times it's the bad actors in history that will persuade good people with goodwill, and people that would never, or states that would never want to do harm. You can persuade them with lies and with manipulation or with propaganda to join your side, because they think that that's going to be the best course of action. They think that that's actually the moral side after they've been tricked. And so they warn of that as well. So you could potentially have just immediate, direct bad actors, or you could have people that are persuaded by the power and just want to protect their security, or you can have good people that are lied to by the bad guys. And then all of a sudden you have this growing force that you have to go against. Now, what he's saying there is if you've got multiple states that are bad actors, you're going to have multiple states that fight and join the sides of the good guys that try and bring justice. And that's when you have the whole country fighting with each other, and that's pretty messy. So if you look at each example that Publius is trying to show to us, he's saying, if this happens, it's not good, because now you have this problem. If this happens and you have multiple states have to fight, and guess what? We end up in another civil war. If this situation, another civil war. And the general message here is that because the Articles of Confederation don't have a process or a national army for us to use that is long-standing and available for us to use whenever there's bad actors, we are going to have to submit ourselves to the violence and chaos that comes with consistent civil warring, whether it's with multiple states or one state at a time. Now, moving on. Next up, we've talked about this one before. Papers 2 through 5, written by John Jay. Remember John Jay? He was he was part of the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the negotiations of the Treaty of Paris. He wrote 2 through 5. And when we talked about 2 through 5, it was the dangers of foreign forces. What was the big lesson there? That when we fight on the inside, when we are fighting domestically, having little civil quarrels, it's really a great opportunity for our enemies abroad, our foreign enemies, or even just people that aren't exactly our enemies but want to take advantage of something that self-serves them. It's a great opportunity for them to come in and say, hey, I'll help. They don't care at all about who wins our civil wars. They don't care about protecting the sanctity of the U.S. Confederacy. Instead, they just see a great opportunity to serve themselves and get something out of it, and they go, we'll provide some resources and assistance. And so the next concern that Hamilton has here, Publius has, is that when you're inviting problems into your country, or when you have problems in your country and you can't find domestic partners, these delinquent states are for sure going to get offers from foreign aggressors, from foreign enemies, or just from people out there in the world that don't have the best of intentions or don't care at all about protecting America moving forward. And guess what? these bad actor states are probably going to accept that help. And what was the lessons in 2 through 5? It was all about once you invite these countries into your land, they aren't going anywhere, and you're kind of stuck with them unless you force them back out. Now, what does this remind you of? For me, it reminds me of Afghanistan. We've been dealing with this for especially since August 2021. August 2021. Geez, time flies. August 2021, when the whole disaster happened with Afghanistan and with the Biden administration, we saw just how involved the world is in Afghanistan of all places. Now, you can look at that and say, why is China in Afghanistan? Why is China giving billions of dollars to the Taliban? Why is Russia in Afghanistan? Why are all these countries in the Middle East in the first place? Do you think they care about protecting the villagers of Afghanistan from the Taliban? Absolutely not, okay? They couldn't care less. What they care about is serving their own needs and benefiting themselves on the world stage. And so they go into a situation where you have like a civil war in Afghanistan and a random country in the Middle East, and they go, hey, we'd like to assist. In exchange, you're going to give us XYZ. So that's what we saw there. And thank goodness that we are a solid foundation of a country right now. This is also why, you guys, when we've talked about this, we've talked about why it's so bad to talk about kicking California out of the country or having Texas secede from the nation or dividing into quarters. I've heard of that too, national divorce. When we divide ourselves, we are turning more and more into situations like the Middle East where it's just all these countries that are constantly fighting, constantly at war with each other, constantly going through civil wars. And the entire world is involved in it because they see selfish opportunity. We cannot allow that to happen in America. Our founders saw that, and they knew it would be best for us to prevent foreign actors from coming on in. What Publius says here, though, about this, I just want to get his direct quote. It says, if associates could not be found at home, recourse would be had to the aid of foreign powers, who would seldom be disinclined to encouraging the dissensions of a confederacy from the firm union of which they had so much fear. And so, what does that mean? Obviously, the world doesn't want us to be a strong union because it's a threat to them. They benefit when we are weak and separated. That is why we should stay strong and united. I mean, that's a great argument if you ask me. Now, moving on to next one, the fifth topic I want to bring up to you guys. Once you get to fighting, think of it like a fight in your personal life. When you squeeze the toothpaste out of a tube, you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. When you say something, you can't take it back. It's already been said, right? That's the classic relationship quote. Or at least I think, from Pinterest. When you break glass, for example, I mean, like, you have to piece it together and it's never going to look the same. Or people use the idea of, like, the crumpled up dollar bill will never be the same. And so think about that as your soul. Don't crumple your soul, all that stuff. When you have states fighting with each other and it gets to a point of actually using force against each other, there's no going back from that point. I mean, it's if you think of the Civil War in America, it's still a very touchy subject for many people. It should be. I mean, we killed each other over something. We had a civil war where Americans killed Americans. It's a touchy subject for a lot of people. That's something that's hard to erase. You can't erase it. You shouldn't erase it. But it's hard to remove the sting of the fact that we did have a period in our history where we slaughtered each other. So what Publius says is when the sword is once drawn, the passions of men observe no bounds of moderation. The suggestions of wounded pride, the instigations of irritated resentment, would be apt to carry the states against which the arms of the Union were exerted to any extremes necessary to avenge the affront or to avoid the disgrace of submission. The disgrace of submission. Now remember this, if you think back to the Reconstruction era after the Civil War, one of the main goals of the leaders of the country was to make sure that there wasn't this frustration between the old Confederate soldiers and the old people that were thinking that they were going to create this Confederacy away from the Union, because they didn't want them to have this long-standing resentment. And I love how he describes it here as this disgrace of submission, the idea that they lost the war and now they're going to hate the people of America when we should be uniting after the war ended. The leaders in D.C. wanted to avoid this. He goes on to say the first war of this kind would probably terminate in a dissolution of the Union. Fascinating that he said this. Now remember, this is 1787, and the Civil War came in the next century, and we prevailed, which is interesting, very interesting. Now, what he goes on to say, and this is a big lesson of this paper 16, is that going into a situation of using force and fighting with each other, getting violent with each other, killing each other, this would be considered a violent death of the Confederacy, of the country. So Publius says this may be considered as the violent death of the country, the Confederacy. But what's the other option? Because he gives two different ways that this could go down. There could be the violent option, and they hadn't experienced that really yet. What he says, though, is what they're probably going to face and what they're currently facing at the moment, this period of 1787, when they're saying the Articles of Confederation aren't working, the country's on the decline, we need to rewrite the government and start fresh, or it's not going to work. He says it's more natural death is what we now seem to be on the point of experiencing, if the federal system be not speedily renovated in a more substantial form. It is not probable, considering the genius of this country, that the complying states would often be inclined to support the authority of the Union by engaging in war against the non-complying states. So let's just take that noted right there. It's not like the states are just dying to go to war with each other. And what he's trying to make the case of is states do not exactly want to say, oh, well, one state isn't exactly following all the rules and now we have to invade them. Do we really want to have to invade a state every time they don't follow the rules? Do we really want to have to do that to ourselves and to our sons and daughters, to our community? And we get into this in the next page. I'll flip a little bit further, but he says there's a big difference between non-compliance and direct and active resistance. And so understanding those differences means that you have to analyze the situation. Unfortunately, the Articles of Confederation just don't allow for that. Right now, all there is saying, well, the only thing we can really do to stop them, if we do want to stop them, is force. But what Publius is saying is that the states don't want to do that, and they should not want to do that, so that's good. But they would always be more ready to pursue the milder course of putting themselves upon equal footing with the delinquent members by an imitation of their example. What does that mean? What he's saying, and this concept of a natural death of the Confederacy, is think of when you lower your standards for yourself and for the people around you. People say, like, surround yourself with people that you want to emulate in 5 years. If you're surrounding yourself with losers that maybe sleep in and don't work hard and don't have a job and don't have any ambition and don't want to better themselves, then that's probably going to be you as you spend more time with them and learn their habits. But if you surround yourself with people that are trying to achieve their dreams, that are reading every day, that aren't using a lot of screen time, that are trying to improve their position in life, and I don't mean like their wealth and their status and stuff, but are trying to actively better themselves as humans, morally, mentally, physically, spiritually, you're going to be in good footing because you're surrounded by winners. The problem is, if we only have one way to solve bad actors in the Union, and it's to use force, and we don't want to use force, there's nothing stopping these bad guys. And what they're going to do is lower the bar. You're going to lower the expectations for everybody because they're going to say, well, if they got away with it, then I should get away with it. And want to know the first example that came to my head? I remember in school, everybody would be like, the teachers, they would say, you can't eat in class. And I always like snacking, okay? I love snacks. And so I would always see other people sneaking food in class, and it was against the rules. But when Morgan is witnessing other people snacking in class, and I know it's against the rules, I go, well, they do it, who cares? And next thing you know, the whole class is like eating meals, straight up meals in math class. I understand that it's not good to be eating a full-out meal from like a Tupperware dish in your math class, but that's how it transgressed, is that the word? That's how it transitions when you allow little infractions on the rules, and then all of a sudden everybody's just like, oh, so you don't really like force us to stick by these rules, and I'm going to break the rules in little ways. And then you have really bad situations where it goes from like eating a granola bar in class, and all of a sudden now everybody's like bringing straight up meals because maybe they missed lunch and they were like, oh, I'll just eat in math class. The concepts now in the students is that well, the teacher never enforced the rules. Nobody's held to the rules, so why should I stick by them? If you're breaking the rule, then I shouldn't have to stick by that rule either. I see this differently in the way of society, right? When we saw 2020 with the protests with Black Lives Matter and everything, I can't remember if I told this story before, but I remember in June 2020, I was so scared that I was going to be one of the people that was in like a viral video of my car getting smashed at a red light at one of those protests that the Black Lives Matter people were using to use like stopping at the intersection, because I would see these videos and like one of them was this mom, she has kids in the back seat and 911 operators are on the phone and she's saying, yes, please help me. They're approaching my car and they're going, sorry, ma'am, City Hall said that they're a sanctioned protest or they're an allowed protest. We can't stop them. Like, just stay in your car. And then the woman's like, no, you don't get it. They're on my car. They're on my car now. I have kids in the back seat. And the woman on the line, the operator, you can Google this, is like, I'm sorry, ma'am. This is an allowed protest. I don't know what to do. And those Black Lives Matter people, the Antifa people, had stopped the intersection traffic and were going and smashing windows, jumping on cars, and threatening people. So that's what I was seeing. And a lot of other young women, men, just average Americans out there were seeing small business owners get beaten. We're seeing stores get burned down and looted, no matter what color or gender or whatever you were. All of this was happening and it felt lawless and it felt so frustrating. So for me, I pay my dang taxes every single year and I follow all the rules and I would never break a rule on purpose. And I found myself in a situation where I was speeding, okay, in June 2020 or something, maybe July 2020. I'm speeding right after all these protests really began. And I am so frustrated with what they're doing to our police officers and everything. And I'm just so mad at it. And I love backing the blue and all this stuff. And I got pulled over and I got a ticket. And the guy was so aggressive and mean and he didn't care. He wasn't like, oh, I'll let you off on a hook or whatever. He just gave me this expensive hundreds of dollars ticket and said, you can try and contest this in court, but I don't know, have a nice day. And I was just looking at the ticket saying, like, I already pay so much money to the government and they just do speed traps to try and get people and get more money from our hard-earned wallet or our hard-earned dollars in our wallets, all this stuff. And I got so frustrated. And it was this idea I realized in my head. It was like, yeah, because they had set this standard that we don't have to follow rules anymore. So for some reason, I'm held accountable, but then other people aren't held accountable for worse things. And it just makes this really big frustration because we all sign this invisible contract in America. Like, we pay taxes, we're good citizens, and then the government provides basic services. It just seems so frustrating to me. But it was the erasure of this agreement we all have as citizens. We saw the same thing. I mean, I think I could talk about this with COVID. I'm sorry to bring up COVID, you guys. I know we hear it all the time, but we all followed the rules for so long, all of 2020. We listened to everything they said. We listened to the scientists. We watched Dr. Fauci. Remember Deborah Birx? Remember her? Deborah Birx was always on my screen in 2020, and my mom and I would watch her. My mom and I watched Tiger King. We did all the things. We followed the rules. And then all of a sudden, after all of our lives were upended and small businesses are crumbling and we are sucking, we then see 12,000 people marching through the city streets of New York City for Black trans lives. What does that mean? 12,000 unmasked people in a pandemic, early 2020, marching for Black trans lives. And the politicians, the liberal politicians, had the gall to then say, well, yeah, I mean, that's an important political issue and you should go out there. And then we found out that the doctors were not even talking to the patients and asking them if they had been at the protest because they didn't want it documented how much of it was spread at the protest. So hearing that the bad actors were not held accountable, how does that make us feel? We say F you. So think of it in the sense of when we see these Antifa Black Lives Matter people raiding through our streets, rioting, looting, and we go, well, then why should we follow the rules that we have to follow? Why do we have to stick to gun laws? Why do we have to listen to the ATF? Why do we have to pay our taxes? Why do we have to go to the city hall and get approval from like 5 different boards to put a porch in our backyard? Why do we have to do any of this stuff? That's what Hamilton Publius is talking about in this paper. The idea that the good actors will eventually just match the behavior of the delinquent actors if we don't hold the delinquent actors accountable. And how the heck are we supposed to hold the delinquent actors accountable in the Articles of Confederation if the only thing we could do is invade them? None of it makes sense. It's bound to fail, is what he's saying. Sorry for the rant, but does that make sense? And so back to that total concept of the natural death of the Confederacy. This is what Hamilton Publius is talking about. The idea that once the good people start matching the behavior of the delinquent people in the delinquent states, because they say, why should I be held accountable for any of my behavior either? Why should I stick to the rules that I don't want to stick to? That's when things just slowly start to fall apart. And Publius says they would always be more ready to pursue the milder course of putting themselves upon equal footing with the delinquent members of by imitation of their example. And the guilt of all would thus become the security of all. Our past experience has exhibited the operation of this spirit in full light. And so he's saying we've already seen a little bit of this play out. It's just going to continue to happen, this slow disintegration of our nation until it just doesn't exist anymore. A natural death. Moving on. Next up, let's see. Publius then says, this is when we're getting into, so what were the Anti-Federalists saying? Anti-Federalists at the time were, of course, against creating this union. And Publius says, it seems to require no pains to prove that the states ought not to prefer a national constitution which could only be kept in motion by the instrumentality of a large army continually on foot to execute the ordinary requisitions or decrees of the government. And yet this is the plain alternative involved by those who wish to deny it the power of extending its operations to individuals. Such a scheme, if practicable at all, would instantly degenerate into military despotism, but it will be found in every light impracticable. Now, what I take out of this is another example of the Federalists saying to the Anti-Federalists, you are worried about what? Tyranny, monarchy, abuse of power. What you're advocating for right now by not advocating for a strong union is going to result in, guess what? Tyranny or monarchy or abuse of power, and in this case, military despotism. Why? Because like we said earlier, it was going to lead to the decay of the Confederacy, either with the natural death of as things dissolve, that's when you just no longer have the Confederacy at all. And we've discussed in recent papers, when you don't have anything, when we don't even try and fix the government or we keep the Articles of Confederation, whatever it may be, if we don't do anything about this, it's going to derail and you're going to have little wars between the states no matter what, because it's looking like the states are about to go to war. The main example that they're using here, though, with the military despotism is going back to that initial concept we discussed earlier in the episode, where the larger state in the battles between the states, the larger state's always going to win. The more powerful state's always going to win. When you have these little military states, it's going to be a situation of these military powers, of these elites that maybe have larger access to the military, larger access to resources and material and land. It's just going to be them that are always on top, and that will lead to the oppression of people, which is exactly what the Anti-Federalists don't want. So then Publius kind of makes a joke about anybody that thinks that this isn't going to happen. He says, whoever considers the populousness and strength of several of these states singly at the present juncture, and looks forward to what they will become even at the distance of half a century, by that he means like this is going to happen quick, and by that he means in less than 50 years we could see something really bad happen. He says, will at once dismiss as idle and visionary any scheme which aims at regulating their movements by laws to operate upon them in their collective capacities and to be executed by a coercion applicable to them in the same capacities. A project of this kind is little less romantic than the monster-taming spirit attributed to the fabulous heroes and demigods of antiquity. Basically saying if you really don't think that any of these bad things are going to happen that we've just discussed in this paper, then you're living in fairy tale land and you can't tell the difference between a fairy tale and reality. And we are working in reality here. You need to get grounded in reality as well and work with us on a solution. Because if you remember the last couple papers, we've been talking about how the Anti-Federalists understand the Articles of Confederation is not working. Both sides agreed on this, but it was only the Federalists that were really providing a solution. The Anti-Federalists were the ones that were saying, well, yeah, I mean, we don't like the current situation, but we don't like your proposal. And when it comes to our own proposal, we don't really have one. And I've told you this before, too. It reminds me of when the conservatives won Congress and won back power in D.C. And what do you know? They promised to repeal and replace Obamacare, and then they didn't have anything to repeal and replace Obamacare with. And so they didn't do anything. And it really frustrated a lot of conservatives. So it was very much just a disappointment. And when politicians say that, I don't know, it's very status quo for them. That being said, let's move on. And I want to close on this big last topic of the paper. A really important part of the failures of the Articles of Confederation is the concept that not only did it not have a standing army present in America or this stronger union that could be used to flex on bad delinquent states or people, but it also didn't have a legislative branch or a judicial branch. There wasn't a system of checks and balances, and that is the quintessential part of American government today, of the U.S. Constitution. And it didn't have something like the Bill of Rights either. And we need to thank the Anti-Federalists for that. Keep in mind, you guys, the U.S. Constitution as proposed when we're talking about these Federalist Papers did not have a Bill of Rights, did not have guaranteed rights. Instead, it was the Anti-Federalists that advocated for it and said, okay, we'll change our minds and we'll vote to ratify if you include it. I think that was just essential. We would not be the country that we are today without the Bill of Rights. And so the end result, the country that we're in right now, is because both the Federalists and Anti-Federalists worked together on this. So don't think that this is like a pro-Federalist or anti-Federalist kind of thing at all. This is thinking both sides, and we're just looking at what both sides are saying. Now, when we look at this one specific issue, though, both sides really screwed up. All sides screwed up when writing the Articles of Confederation because it lacked the main part of what makes America so special today, and that was the checks and balances of power, the different branches, the different levels, everything that's so great about our system now. And that specifically means there was no legislature and no judicial branch. So let's read about what they say now. Publius says, the result of these observations to an intelligent mind must be clearly this, that if it be possible, at any rate, to construct a federal government capable of regulating the common concerns and preserving the general tranquility, it must be founded, as to the objects committed to its care, upon the reverse of the principle contended for by the opponents of the proposed Constitution. It must carry the agency to the persons of the citizens. What does that mean? Remember what I mentioned in the beginning when I read the different preambles? The first preamble, the structure of the Articles of Confederation was just bringing different states together, sovereign states, individual states that had their own governments under this one league that was called the Confederacy. It wasn't a relationship document between the people of America and their federal government that also touched on state versus federal power. Instead, what Publius says now is, if we do take on and create a federal government, to succeed, it must be about a relationship between the people of the country and the federal government. And the federal government must be able to have agency over the persons of the citizens. They must be able to have that kind of power over people. And we discussed this in the beginning. Sorry I keep saying that, but like this is touching on so many different topics that we've already lightly touched on or gone deeper into. The idea that, yes, you have to give up a little bit of power over your own life in exchange for the security that comes with government. Now, I believe in giving very little power to the federal government over my life, but there is a small amount that we must submit to become citizens protected by the Bill of Rights and protected by the U.S. Constitution. I mean, we're really blessed to be able to be in a country like this, and I'm proud to be an American citizen. I'm proud to be a part of this. We've got some problems, but we're working on it, okay? That being said, let's keep going. It says, it must stand in need of no intermediate legislations, but must itself be empowered to employ the arm of the ordinary magistrate to execute its own resolutions. Now, what are they saying there, too? This didn't exist in the Articles of Confederation. You just had separate states with their own forms of government in each state, and then they were in this league that existed. The concept of making federal laws and federal rules that people had to abide to did not exist. And now if you ask me, we got way too many federal laws, way too many federal rules, way too much federal involvement in our lives to begin with now. But I still understand what they're saying there, and I agree, because you have to have some sort of national cohesivity. And at the time, it was just different rules for each person in each state. They say, the majesty of the national authority must be manifested through the medium of the courts of justice, and so establishing that third branch, a judicial branch, a system of justice that all people in all states, all people of the country must now be held to. They must be seen equally in the eyes of the law. They must be held accountable equally in that same way, and the federal government must have the power and ability to hold individuals and states accountable. And this is on the next page, and I kind of just briefly want to touch on it because it's more of a concept that will carry on moving forward. But it's the idea of, if somebody is not following a rule, does that mean we have to invade that person's home? Does that mean we have to invade that state? Or does it mean that we have to find a way to decipher, is this person just not complying for non-malicious reasons? Maybe they can't comply for certain circumstances and factors, and we should try and figure out why and help them using our powers and using our resources. Or are they saying that they are actively resisting the U.S. government and their willingness to be a part of the society anymore is no longer there? What are they saying with their action? Are they deserving of force, or are they deserving of understanding and support? And that's where the federal government should be able to decipher and then use certain behaviors and actions accordingly. So I love that. And the creation of a system of justice, I mean, we've got some problems there as well. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but it really is exceptional what we have in this country when you consider what other people go throughout the world. And just look at COVID right now. We at least have an opportunity to seek justice after all of the wrongs that we have been put through over the last 2 years. Other countries like Australia, other countries like New Zealand, those poor people don't have a system of government like we have, where the people have some sort of power, some sort of check on the government. They are just forced into these things, and they have no way to seek retribution, and that's a shame. So let's be thankful for the fact that our structure allows us the opportunity to right this wrong, because it is a deep wrong. He goes on to say, the government of the Union, like that of each state, must be able to address itself immediately to the hopes and fears of individuals, and to attract to its support those passions which have the strongest influence upon the human heart. It must, in short, possess all the means, and have a right to resort to all the methods of executing the powers with which it is entrusted, that are possessed and exercised by the governments of the particular states. Now, you guys, I hope that was helpful. That was a jam-packed episode. My brain is tired, okay? My brain is tired. It was a short paper, but it was just jam-packed. And that's because it's really important for us to understand the failures of the Articles of Confederation, what it led to with the creation of the U.S. Constitution, and the arguments that were made by the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists using the failures of the Articles of Confederation. Now, if you look around me, I've got all these papers that have fallen out of my book over the filming of this episode because I read this thing so much. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, Charles Kessler's version of the Federalist Papers is my favorite. I also recently ordered a new book that will be on future episodes. It has each Federalist and Anti-Federalist paper combined, paired up to show the differences between the papers. And I'm super excited to bring that on because I really do want to start engaging both papers and comparing them more in each episode instead of doing one and then the other or whatever we want to do. You'll start to see we're getting more guests on. I hope you watched the episode with Madison Cawthorn, Congressman from North Carolina. If you haven't watched that yet, we don't talk about a specific paper, but we touch on number 10. We touch on number 52, which is the role of the Congress. We touch on family, we touch on faith, we touch on babies, we touch on COVID, we touch on the secrets the secrets that are going on behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. that really he has an insider view on. So I hope you guys go watch that. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple, it's on Spotify. But if you go to tpusa.com/freedompapers, you're going to be able to see all the episodes and get access to all the different platforms it's on. Thank you to Turning Point USA for powering this. You guys follow Freedom Papers Podcast, and TPUSA Live is a new Instagram page, and it's showing some clips of us too. But other than that, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for listening.